Thanks to everybody who's watched the previous video about laying out your picture book across 12 spreads. I'm glad some of you have found it helpful. That's really nice. What I wanted to talk to you about today was the same thing, but actually looking at a real book rather than just talking about it in theory. So I've drawn out my grid a bit more neatly than last time. So you've got the 12 spreads across here and the critical moments that we spoke about before. So the launching point for the story and this big sort of peak of the action. And somebody asked me in the comments whether you could have this occurring before spread 3. And yes, you absolutely can. So this kicking off point for the story where your main character decides to do something and take part in the action. Absolutely, that can occur in spread 1 even, or spread 2, but it shouldn't occur later than spread 3. If it's happening after spread 3, then it probably feels to your reader like it's taking a bit long to get into the story. And likewise for the point in spread 9 and spread 10. Yes, it can move about a little bit, but it should be about 3/4 of the way through. Now, I'm a planner, so I like to do this in advance when I'm first working on a story. Some people like to just let the muse take them wherever it's going to go, and they just write their story and see what happens. To me, I would still like to go back afterwards and check that the inciting incident and the change from the normal world of the main character into the story world, what's going to happen to them to change things, happens about 1/4 of the way through, and that the big peak of the story is about 3/4 of the way through. So if you're writing a 600-word picture book, that's going to happen within the first 150 words for a 600-word picture book. And this is going to happen at about 450 words. The really cool thing about this is that, say you're writing a chapter book or junior fiction and it's 6,000 words, not 600. You want your starting point for your story, your inciting incident, to have occurred by within the first 1,500 words. If it's taking longer than that, it's likely that your story is taking a bit too long to get going. And you want this to happen at about 4,500 words. And say you've written a 60,000 upper middle grade story. You still want your inciting incident to have occurred within the first 1/4 of your word count. And you want this to occur at about the 3/4 of the way through point. So when you get to about 45,000 words, it can move around a bit. I'm not being too prescriptive, but at roughly these points. I don't know if anybody watches Death in Paradise, one of our favourite programmes in our house. But if you watch that, and in fact if you watch lots and lots and lots of films and TV programmes, what you will find is that there'll be a little bit of introduction. We meet the characters that are going to take part in the story. Somebody dies, and it will be about 12-13 minutes in to the story in Death in Paradise. Then we get interviewing the characters. We try and work out who's done it. There are various red herrings and blind alleys for the detectives to go down, and then there will be a moment where something happens and the detective suddenly realises who's done it. And that will happen at about 43 minutes, 44 minutes in. And then you get the denouement. He brings all the characters together and he explains who did it. These 1/4 points and 3/4 points are so important in all storytelling, not just picture books. So this format is so helpful for planning any story, not just picture books. So let's look at some real books and how they've done it in terms of laying out the action across 12 spreads. So I've had a look through my picture books and I found some lovely ones here that are all laid out across 12 spreads. So let's look at Little Red Riding Hood. Picture books are somewhat unique in that when you read them, you aren't reading one page at a time. You're reading 2 pages at a time. You're always looking at 2 at once. And that's why it's useful to think about spreads rather than page numbers. These first pages, we don't have to worry about these. That's what the publisher will look at and the book designer. This is the first spread of the story. So we're going to take these 2 pages in all at once. Yes, we read from left to right, but it's a whole experience looking at the 2 pages as one. So it's good to talk about spreads rather than pages with picture books. So in the first spread, we're introduced to Little Red Riding Hood and we find out she loves reading. Spread 2, we meet Mum and we see where Little Red Riding Hood lives, and Mum sends her off into the woods to return a library book. And on spread 3, Little Red Riding Hood meets the wolf. And this is where the story really begins. This is the spread that takes Little Red Riding Hood from her ordinary world into the story. And over the middle spreads, we have all sorts of tricks and shenanigans with the wolf. And then we come to spread 9. And this is the second point. So this is about 3/4 of the way through. And this is where the wolf has the librarian and Little Red Riding Hood cornered. And he reveals his dastardly plan that it is his destiny to eat her. It must be true because it says so in this book. And then on the page turn from spread 9 to spread 10, this is the whole point of the story. This is where it gets revealed on that big page turn from 9 to 10. And here, Little Red Riding Hood explains that there are all sorts of ways you can end a story and it doesn't have to be the way you expect. And then we get the resolution where the wolf tries out all sorts of other endings. And here's the final spread, which is the summing up at the end of the story, a beautiful ending. So that's a typical book laid out across 12 spreads. Ah, you might say, but I've found some books that aren't laid out across 12 spreads. You're absolutely right. There are lots of books that are laid out across more than 12 spreads. And this one by John Condon and Matt Hunt, which is a really excellent read, is laid out across 15 spreads. 14 or 15, can't remember. But even though the publishers have made the decision to spread this story out over a couple of extra spreads, the critical points are still in the same place. So the first one here is about a quarter of the way through, where Tom, who's been watching for pirates, comes and tells everybody that they're coming and they've got to hide. And they wait and wait and wait until ... And this is the kicking off into the story. So they've waited. So what's going to happen? Are the pirates going to come? No, they're not. The pirates don't come, but we're kicked into the story. So now we get to follow Tom as he repeatedly looks for pirates. They don't come, the people get bored of hiding. And then we get to about 3/4 of the way through. This is the spread 9 moment, spread 9-10 moment. This is equivalent to spread 9. It isn't spread 9 in this book, but it's the equivalent to spread 9. It's about 3/4 of the way through. And the pirates do come. And we get a mirror of the page turn from 3 to 4 here with Nobody heard them as they made their way down the narrow streets until ... What is going to happen now? And then we come into the final quarter where we find out what's actually going on. And I won't give the ending away because it's brilliant. So that just shows you how you might have in your collection of picture books lots of books that aren't laid out in the end across 12 spreads, but that doesn't matter. You can still plan your story across 12 spreads because it's really easy to see a quarter of the way through and 3/4 of the way through.